All right, I figure let's get started. We're about 4 minutes in, and people can join wherever we go. So, thank you for joining my talk. Hopefully, you guys are doing pretty well on the virtual code day. I see there's a lot of fun things, including an Among Us tournament. I'm pretty bad at that, but hopefully that was fun. So, just to introduce myself, so my name is Erwin Chan. I am a recruiter and a recruiting manager, currently working at Discovery. Before that, I've had a very odd kind of like career path. I started off as a software developer back in the day. I graduated from Brown University with a computer engineering degree. Um, and then after that, I went to get my MBA from Duke, and I joined Microsoft as a product manager and marketing manager. Decided to do a career change and moved over to university recruiting, where I spent about 3 years doing MBA recruiting and about 1 or 2 years doing college recruiting. And now and then 5 years at Amazon as a recruiter and a recruiting manager. So I have a lot of different perspective overall, and what I like to do on this workshop, so to speak, is to sort of help you understand the internship process. My understanding is that the people on this call are primarily in college, maybe early stage, maybe high school, first or second year, and so forth. Um, and so I want to sort of give you an understanding of the internship process and how you should be thinking about this, as well as your full-time recruiting process as well. This is going to be very question and answer driven. So I want to answer your questions. My style, I've done a lot of these talks before, and my style is that it's to be quite frank, is not going to be a very inspirational talk. So I would say it's not my talks are very tactical in that sense. Like here's the actual practical things that you should be doing, as opposed to like here's the philosophy of how you should approach this. So if you have questions that if you always wanted to ask someone but didn't know who to ask, or even controversial questions or whatever, I'm happy to answer those questions, and we'll be monitoring the Q&A section on this chat as we go through the process. So please send me your questions, because that's going to be driving that. I did get questions ahead of this talk, about 20 or so, and so I'm going to answer some of those as we go through. But first, I wanted to sort of give you sort of distill some thoughts about the whole process as well. Before I move forward, there's a couple things I really want to highlight. And I call them warnings, but I'm going to be giving you some thoughts and some timelines and some things that you should be doing. I do want you to think, though, I don't want you to think that there is one way of doing this. There is no right or wrong way in finding an internship. There is no wrong number or right number of internships that you do before you get a job. I'm not even telling you that you should get an internship, right? It's really how you want to do this. Do what's best for you. Don't feel that you need pressure to do things that other people are telling you to do. But you should be educated as well. And by educated, I mean, for example, I'm going to be telling you that you should be looking for an internship in the fall, August or September, right? Time for them to start. A lot of people don't think to look for an internship or a full-time job until second semester, March, April. I've talked to students who start looking for jobs when they graduate, and that's a little bit too late. So you do want to be educated about the process, but really distill all this information as well as what you hear, and figure out what works for you. Different school. The other thing I want to say, different schools, different locations, depending on where you are right now, will offer different opportunities, right? Whether you go to a small school or a very large school, whether you're in the U.S. or not, don't feel limited by your environment and the opportunities that you have. You can do a lot of things that go beyond your school, beyond your environment. So don't feel discouraged that hey, you see students from this really prestigious school get all the opportunities and you don't, right? You can get those as well. So I just want to highlight that overall, just for you to know that, hey, I'm not telling you that's exactly what you should be doing. Like you should all work for an Amazon, Google, or Microsoft before you start full time. There's a lot of ways of doing that. So just take that with a grain of salt. I am going to preach those. So why internships are important. I think it's really about getting experience that you can sort of show in your resume, right? So at school, you're learning theoretical stuff. You're doing some projects that sort of enforce some of the theoretical stuff. The stuff that you do at CodeDay is very hands-on as well, but it's different than working in a corporate environment or in a real work environment as well. You'll learn a lot more stuff. You'll learn what real people do in real life versus in the academic theoretical side. So it's really good to gain that practical experience and advance your skills. I will also say that a lot of the FANG type companies, and I really don't like that terminology, but it's kind of funny. If you don't know what FANG means, it's Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, Uber, LinkedIn, Lyft, and Airbnb. I think all that's actually pretty outdated. So I put a plus in there. So basically, relatively large, medium-sized, established tech companies out there. You can also add Tesla, You can even add Robinhood now in these days. But a lot of these companies will actually fill most of their college hires from their intern class. They view the intern programs as kind of like a 3-month tryout for a full-time job. And so I have seen in the past some of these large companies, fill most, if not all, of their full-time hiring from their intern class, leaving very little opportunities for other people as well. It does help your resume down the road. To have even any sort of internship that's relevant to your path is useful for if you're looking for a full-time job or down the road. And plus, most of these internships will pay you money, right? So you can make some money during the summer, and it's a good opportunity to have as well. Um, so let's talk about the timeline about when what you should be doing in your career, right? So if you're in high school right now, and I don't know how many people right now in high school on this call, but let's say you're in high school, you're looking to get an internship in high school. Very few companies have a high school internship program. Microsoft does, but I believe I haven't looked at it too carefully today. But Microsoft's is limited to local students, basically people in the Seattle area, primarily because they can't sponsor travel or lodging. It's very much people that can drive to Microsoft or have their parents drive to Microsoft on a daily basis. So so in this, if you're looking for an internship, I would say like look at programs that are structured for high schoolers. Namely, you see a lot of government agencies and universities, research agencies do a lot of these high school programs and so forth. That's probably the best way to do it. I also think doing things like CodeDay as well would be a good thing, so you can at least get some experience and potentially also a portfolio for stuff that you're doing. So if you don't have an internship, just work on a project, right? Develop a game that you want to publish on Apple or Android. Develop a website. Develop whatever you want to do, right? Develop a sorting mechanism for, like, if you collect Pokemon cards, like my son wants to do, you can create a database and a way for you to organize that. Just get involved and get some doing things. I don't think you need to feel like you need to get an internship to stay on track. But if you're in high school, that's what I sort of recommend. I do want to call out, there are I would be very careful of unpaid internships, right? I mean, if you were to be a page in Congress, right? I think that's unpaid. That would be good to do, right? But I think there are a lot of local companies and a lot of companies that smaller companies that will say, hey, get great experience with unpaid internship. The reason why I'd be saying very careful of that is, like, I think a lot of those are more interested in getting free labor as opposed to providing you with an opportunity, right? So I don't think there's any situation where it should um, be unpaid in that sense. So just be very careful with what you take on and what is offered to you. Also with small tech companies as well, again, just be careful. Not to say that don't do it, but just be careful as you're stepping into those. I don't want you to be exploited in those situations. So you definitely don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're going to be underpaid or they're trying to exploit you for cheap labor. So in college, between your first and second years, that's your first opportunity for a summer internship. Again, the larger companies will probably not look to hire rising sophomores into that. You don't have enough CS experience yet, and so largely their programs are dedicated towards juniors and seniors. So I would again target your local college or university research or a professor or something you can do there, or even smaller mid-sized companies could potentially offer you or be willing to hire more freshman sophomore, maybe for that cheap labor, but also maybe they're willing to take risks, or they have opportunities for you to do things overall, and they don't have access to doing a full-blown recruiting process, right? So, but you'll see as this process goes through, the longer you are in school, you can add larger and larger tech companies, add startups into the mix as well, because by your second and third year, you should have enough enough knowledge and enough classes, at least enough basics to be able to contribute to those. The reason why I didn't include startups in their first and second years, because largely these guys are looking for people to be productive. They don't have time to really just provide a learning experience. But between your second and third year and onwards, some startups will be interested in talking with you. And then your third and fourth years, it's really going to be targeting the companies that you may want to work with. Like I said before, a lot of companies are going to hire out of their intern class, especially their rising senior intern class, right? That last time. So you really want to target those companies and spread a wide net, right? So you should view all this process kind of like college search, right? So I don't know how many colleges you apply to if you were, but you could spend a lot of time to apply for companies, and I would say just cast a wide net because you never know how things work. I have seen, by the way, when I was at Microsoft, people who are three-time interns, right? Um, Basically they were hired in the freshman year, sophomore year, and so forth. I would say that's very, very rare, once in a blue moon and so forth. So that's definitely not the norm. Don't feel like you need to have three internships at a large tech company to be successful. Um, there's also questions about like, hey, do I do an internship through a school year? Does that make sense and so forth? And I say, hey, it's your call. I don't think it's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't think there's a right way, wrong way of doing it overall. I don't want people to think that you need to do an internship during the school year, because I know you have your studies. I know some people also work during the school year as well, to pay for school. So I don't think it's something that's necessary. It's pretty rare. A lot of the schools will, a lot of the companies won't offer in internships during the year, but more and more are offering what they call off-cycle internships, because there's some schools out there that are they're different, right? They're either on the quarter system, or even schools like Waterloo in Canada, where they require 3 semesters of actual work experience before you graduate. And so you will see a lot of Waterloo students do off-cycle internships overall. So it's your decision to want to do it. I don't. The opportunities are very few and far between, so it's not a necessity, and it's actually relatively hard to get, I think. Um, so. Um, there's a question here from Callie about how can someone get an IT internship if they have basic coding experience. Most internships require very complex experience. Hopefully, what I'm trying to show you here is that um, if you have basic coding overall, it's going to be a little more difficult but hopefully that's going to be more in your first or second years and so forth, right? So I don't think in those situations you should be targeting, super large intern programs like Google or Facebook or Microsoft. Maybe look at smaller companies as a whole, or maybe work on projects as well. I want to highlight in that question, by the way. I wouldn't call them IT internships. As a recruiter, when you say IT, I think outside of a recruiter or in a tech space, when you say IT, I guess it means all of tech. Within tech, IT has a very relatively narrow function, which is basically like customer support, infrastructure support, servers, and so forth. Versus software developers are called, software engineering or SDEs and stuff like that. So we actually associate it a little differently. So I want to call that out a little bit. That it's more, you're looking for more of an SD internship, a software development engineer internship, not an IT internship. So really brief answer questions here. It's like, so when should you start? I mentioned it earlier, start as early as possible, right? It is a rolling process. They're going to offer people as they come along, right? So if you do wait until January even, or March or April, it might be too late. Their programs might be completely full. So don't start too early. I mean, June and July is way too early, because most of the companies haven't even started the process. And, the smaller the company, the more unstructured their process are, they're going to have a different timelines. They might take longer to get things going. They might actually start recruiting in the spring versus the fall. But if you're talking about the larger companies, the companies with more established programs, they're going to start probably in August, September. They're going to go into schools and opening their applications on their websites. So you definitely should apply as early as you can. I had a lot of questions about how to do that. Is LinkedIn or Indeed a good place to do it? Generally, I would say the best place to do it is to go to the company's websites, right? They usually have a special section for college recruiting with more information, but also a place for you to put their resume in there, and that at least will go straight to your recruiter. Whether it gets read or not remains to be seen, but at least you'll get it to the right place. Your school is also a good place for it as well. If your school sponsoring some resume drops on their career site, or even having their company come over and do a talk as well, that's a great place for you to get your application going, or at least get your resume in the process as well. So what about LinkedIn or Indeed, or, I think I saw a website called internships.com and so forth. I'd be very careful with those. I mean, I think it'd be a good place for you to learn and find internships. But if you applied onto LinkedIn or Indeed, just go to the company website and apply there as well, just to make sure your information is there. The reason is that usually when you apply, if jobs are posted to LinkedIn, there's a connection between the company's, we call an ATS, applicant tracking system, and LinkedIn is usually there's a connection there, and sometimes it's stable, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's manual, sometimes the recruiter randomly posted onto LinkedIn versus an official post, so you don't really know for sure. But I would always apply to the company website. I'll also check your school's career center and see what's there as well. Do any of you experience? I'm gonna go very quickly on this one, just to give you a high level overview. I can't give you a detailed view of what kind of questions will be seen. I think that's there's a lot of resources online that I'll show you in a second. But generally, your experience will be that you'll potentially talk to a recruiter, what we call a recruiter screen, or an interaction. Meaning, like if they do come on campus at your school and you meet them at a career fair or a presentation, that's an interaction as well. Basically, the recruiters, it's not really an interview, but recruiter is really there to sort of figure out like which candidates could be good candidates for the process, right? Like we could submit every candidate and that we get that apply into the interview process, but it's just pretty impossible to interview everybody like that. So they're trying to figure out who are the right fits for the role. Are we looking for are you a computer science major, or are you an economics major that happened to drop the resume on every single internship they could find, right? So they're looking for just to sort of assess the fit for the internship or the process to see if you have a chance to move forward. And then usually there's the first round coding interview. It's either done through a real life person, but generally you'll see these days are done through an automated test, right? So you're given 90 minutes to 2 hours to do a test that's done online, completely coding wise. You're going to have a basic IDE, and you're going to have some compiling tools and so forth. HackerRank is one of those that comes to mind that offers those. I know Amazon has an in-house one that they built from scratch. I think Google has one as well that's in-house as well. And those are basically covering fundamentals, right? Data structures and algorithms, problem solving. Can you just write clean code as a whole? Can you brute force a solution? Can you check your edge cases and so forth? Just can your code compile and run, right? Sometimes you'll see a second phone interview. It will be with a real life person. Usually it will be a real life person if it's a second phone interview. I doubt people will send you to a second automated coding interview. And then there's a final round interview that could be ranging from 4 to 5 interviews or even more. Obviously done over Zoom these days, but if things were normal, you would be flying out to the company and meeting with 4 or 5 engineers, and it will be comprised of more coding, some design questions, some behavioral questions, and so forth. So relatively straightforward in terms of interview process. So I'm brushing through a lot at a high level, and I'm sure a lot of you are asking, like, well, what do they cover? How to prepare for the interview itself? So, where do you get help? You're not doing this alone. There's a lot of resources available out there. First off, your career centers, both your overall school career centers and your department career centers. If you're a CS student, your CS department might have your own career center and so forth. Those are largely okay places to go get help. I think they'll be able to give you some general pointers for your resume and so forth. Just largely understand that a lot of the career centers, their quality could be hit or miss. I feel like a lot of the career centers, and I apologize to anybody from a career centers listening, they're generalists as a whole. They are there to serve the overall population. They may not be armed with the ability to provide detailed feedback for a CS student or an engineer, and so forth. But the main thing you're looking for there is probably help for your resume if you haven't built one before, but also to see what companies are coming and where you can apply and what companies are interested in your school. That's where I would say that to get some help for. Online is, I think, there's a ton of resources out there. You could find a lot of guides from on how to land an internship, how to land a technical role. I found one this morning from Make School by Jeremy Rossman that was pretty interesting. But you could just search around, you'll find a lot of different guides. Just realize, again, there's no one guide out there that's the right one. Just read a bunch of them, get a general idea, and sort of form a picture of what you're looking to do. There are a lot of a list of companies like out there. Zachlight, there's a GitHub that someone's created that has tons of all these companies of internships. That will give you a starting point of where to go. I would view internships and finding a full-time job as just like you applying for college, right? You're going to be applying to a lot of colleges, and it's going to be even more so when you apply to jobs. So having a list of what's out there is really, really cool to have. And so, and it obviously opens the door beyond just the Fangmilla type of companies that are pretty prominent. You'll see a lot of startups and a lot of smaller companies out there that have some good internship programs. Um, uh, to prepare for the interviews, there's a lot of places for interview prep, right? So LeetCode is a very famous one. It's now like a synonym for basically the style of interviews that a lot of the tech companies do. Geeks for Geeks has good guides and good practice questions for you to see. I would highly recommend you go on there because, you know, getting your resume and getting noticed is one thing with your skills, but answering the right interview questions is really critical. So having the fundamentals, being able to do a technical phone screen is a skill of itself. I would actually argue as a technical recruiter for a while that I think there is no one has really perfected the right way of interviewing for real world experience, right? People have tried, they've done case studies, they've done simulations and so forth. A lot of companies rely on LeetCode, basically like, hey, you know, write some code that will sort this function and filter out prime numbers, something like that, right? Stuff that you'll never do in real life, but it in defense of tech companies, it does help us find who has the right fundamentals, who can sort of understand things, and it does take some practice, honestly, to be able to run that style. So I definitely recommend you preparing, practicing a lot of those questions. And I found there's a lot of communities out there that can ask questions. LinkedIn has some forums. Reddit is decent. Quora is pretty good as well. You can find some questions and get some advice on where to go. I would argue that most of your questions have been asked by many people in the world. You're not alone, and you're not in a unique situation, right? So your questions have been answered by somebody. So definitely look around and find that. And then I found a lot of great LinkedIn and Medium posts from engineers who have gone through the process and they're giving you advice on that one. That's a really good place for you to get some perspective as well. And then YouTube is great, right? So for interview questions particularly, I found a lot of great resources recently on doing a mock interview. Life at Google actually has their own like mock technical interview for you to watch. Exponent has been one of my favorites recently. They have some really great videos on how to answer interview questions, how to do technical phone interviews, how to do technical interviews as a whole, and not just for engineers, but I've seen one for TPMs, technical program managers, product managers. I've actually seen some videos on how to negotiate offers. I don't cover negotiation much on this one, but there's not much for you to negotiate on college offers. A lot of them are relatively standard, but I think there's a lot of great resources on YouTube for you to see things as opposed to you trying to do things on your own, right? I'm very much of a visual learner, so I like to watch other people do things and get that understanding. And then there's some really good books out there, Cracking the Coding Interview and Programming Interviews Exposed. Could be also resources that you could look at as well. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to do. I'm not going to cover a lot of them here, but there's you're not alone in doing this, and there's a lot of resources that you can get. So now I'm going to start answering questions. Please send me your questions through the QA. I'm going to answer some of the previous ones. So yeah, one question, Heavenly Cole, any solid resume builder recommendations? No. I think there are a lot of resume builders out there. I think that it's a skill that you should learn. It's how to write your own resume, right? I don't recommend paying for someone to build a resume. If you feel like you need to, that's more power to you and go for it. But I think it's a skill set you should need to have for the rest of your life, right? And the reason why I don't recommend resume builders is because they take templates and they ask you to fill the templates out and generate something, and that usually doesn't really work for everybody. So what I recommend you doing, a couple of things: go to your career center, talk to friends and family, right? Talk to your parents; they might have resumes as well. Look at search online, right? You'll find a lot of real life resumes, and find a template that you can use that you like, and start building off of that, and start learning how to write, your skills, especially as college a student right now, a high school student potentially, your resumes will look different than mine, right? So how do you format a college student's resume? What should be on there, and so forth? I could spend a whole other talk to do that. Um, so one thing I do recommend though is don't make it pretty. There are a lot of builders out there and a lot of college student resumes that are very flashy, a lot of graphics, very colorful, a lot of design that went into it. Um, I don't recommend to do those. One, a lot of designs that make it look pretty take up a lot of space and create white space issues, and also move things around to where recruiters like myself have a hard time finding, right? Recruiters are very good at being efficient at reading resumes, and we expect things to be in a certain place at a certain place in certain places. So your name, your contact information at the top, your education's in a certain place, your experience is a certain place, your skill, your classes that we take in are in a certain place. So if you start moving things around, it becomes really hard to read. And I will tell you, when recruiters are going through college resumes, they're probably doing it at a clip of about one every 5 seconds, one every 10 seconds. And I would say if we come across one that's hard to read and we, don't have time to sort of like figure it out, we'll just go on to the next one and you'll lose your chance. So I'm the advocate of one, not to make it pretty, but make it clean, right? So it is going to be full of text. It's going to be white, and it's going to be a very standard layout. But maybe I'm old and old fashioned, but I haven't seen a colorful one that works. Now, if you are a UX designer or a graphic artist or something that involves visual design, by all means, create a resume that has some great designs and so forth. As a software developer or literally any other role out there, I would stay away and just create a very simple resume format. So let me answer some questions here. So what qualities would you look for in a high schooler to consider them for an internship? So I did interviews for the high school program at Microsoft, right? And most of the people who applied to there have very little CS experience, right? They might be taking this APCS at their high school and so forth, but largely that's almost irrelevant, right? Because I don't think what you've learned is going to be enough to do an internship or enough to be unless you've been a developer for like the last 10 years, 5 years, since you're 12 or something like that, then I think generally, one class may not do it. What I saw in the Microsoft program was like we were almost interviewing people just like they would for entry into college. And we're looking for people who are motivated. We were looking for people who are relatively accomplished, but also who had who understood the direction and the reason why they wanted this internship, right? So a lot of students I met were like, yeah, I've been doing APCS and so forth. And then you ask them like, why do you want to do this internship? They're like, well, it's a nice thing to do, right? Versus I met some that are, pretty amazing. They talk about, here's my path, here's where I want to go, here's what, and so forth. So, I guess my answer is like, we're not looking at your experience and your depth in coding. It's going to be, in fact, we asked no technical questions in that. It was primarily, I think we did actually have one very high level technical questions, but nothing like super deep. So for a high schooler, it's really more about motivation, more about like just like the same things that we would as you're going into college, I would say. What can you do in high school to set yourself apart? If you have the luxury of having a CS class at your high school, but by all means do it. If you don't worry about it. There are online classes you can take. Coursera and many others right now that you can do. Some colleges are even offering their classes online for free. MIT being one of them, I know for sure. Or just do projects, right? Like I think it's not about setting yourself apart in the crowd. Like you're not going to get a leg up unless you end up doing APCS or something like that. But even then, it's just one class ahead. But I think what you can do is really understand if you do like being a software developer earlier on. I didn't really know that I wanted to do it until college, so I didn't have that exposure. But if you're doing it in high school, you get a leg up at least on what you want to do, what's good for you, and also do projects as well because it'll help you learn a little bit better. It'll be fun for you to create your own thing. But yeah. if I, and then likewise, next question is, if I start my CS journey in college, will you step back from everybody? No, right? Like your CS program in college should be equipped for you to learn the basics relatively early, right? I'd be very careful if your school is doing things like data structures and algorithms in your third year, right? That's going to be a red flag for me, because that should be your year one class, maybe year two class, if you start a little later. Data structures and algorithms is the fundamentals for basically all the interviews, at least on my side. And so look at your curriculum and make sure that some of the basics are there. Databases. We had operating systems in our third year when I was at Brown. That I'm not sure that's relevant for everybody, but that was a class a lot of people took as well. But yeah, so you're not gonna be set back, but just make sure you know what your curriculum is. And if you do find that, hey, for some reason your school is offering data structures and algorithms in your third year, then start studying it in your first year, right? And on your own, because it will come up in interviews, it will come up in your development and so forth. If you're doing schema development for 2 years and then Java in your third or fourth years, start learning Java on your own, right? One of the nice things about these days is that there's so much resources available online that you should have that drive and that initiative to learn on your own. And I would actually argue, if you're here right now, we're doing stuff on CodeDay, then you do have that initiative. So keep at it, and you'll be fine, and you'll be ahead from a lot of people there. What are the best ways to get internships in college, especially the early years? I talked about a little bit a way. There's no like best way, right? I think it's really starting early, being proactive in your search. If you're a sophomore, the big companies might not be accessible, but hey, try and see if you can get a hold of a college recruiter from those companies and so forth. But look locally, look online, or get some friends together and put together a project. I think what you want to show at the end of the day is not that you've worked at Google or Facebook or Microsoft, but that you have experience, that you didn't just coast through your 4 years and just did your classes and then show up and say, hey, I need a job, right? If you have a track record, if you have a portfolio, those are really, really good things. Would you recommend doing a internship in person or remotely? That is very interesting. Okay. I don't think there's an option for you to do one in person these days, right? I have a cousin who has an internship at Boeing right now, and it's also virtual. This past summer, it was all remote, right? So, and I don't know if if let's say in March of next year, 2021, everything miraculously be back to normal, right? No more COVID, and everybody's physically normal from 2019 times. I'm not sure they would offer a remote internship in some cases, right? But if they do, I don't know if it matters so much, right? In-person internships will probably offer you a little bit more perks, because they'll probably do more people. It'll be easier to do more community building, get to meet everybody else, have some fun. I know some of the larger internship programs have a built-in schedule of events that are fun. At Microsoft, we're famously known to have a summer intern party where I know in past years we've had what was it, Black Eyed Peas perform once, some pretty big Lumineers actually performed once. So just really large events, and they gave Xboxes and Surfaces out. So really cool things. So there's a lot of like fun stuff in person. At the end of the day, though, like you want to have a good internship, and a good internship means you have a project that you can deliver. Right? There's a beginning, and then there's an end goal, and you can achieve it in that time. I didn't cover it in this talk, but this is a good question. A bad internship, I think, is, well, if you have no work, if they're asking you to do coffee every day, that's not an internship, right? And you should run away. But also, if you're just doing day-to-day bug fixes, right? If you're just doing a normal job, that could be decent experience for you to know what the day-to-day life is, but that might not be a best internship, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to talk about what you've accomplished in that internship in those 3 months, right? If you go back to your professor and say, hey, I worked. Here's what I delivered for Lyft, right? And here's the project. Here's the scope of it, and here's what I accomplished, and so forth. That's a good project. So if you do have an internship where the guy is making you do real life work, that's great. But then ask them to like, hey, can you package a project for me that I can deliver and complete by the time my internship is over? a lot of questions. I want to go back. So, should I take an AP Science class in 10th grade? Or is that too early? It's never too early, right? Like, um, if you can take it and you can do well in your 10th grade, you have the luxury of doing it because most schools do not offer it that early. By all means, do it. And then figure out what to do next, right? You're in 11th grade and 12th grade, like what can you do after that? You might be have to taking college classes, then that'd be great for you as well. So never too early to do what you really are passionate about, right? Um, let's see. How can I get an internship without any previous experience? Good question. This question is probably asked by a lot of people trying to break into a role, right? So a lot of product managers that I talk to who are trying to get into product manager role have no experience and say, how do I get into it, right? So since you guys are all college students, you're gonna what's gonna be useful is to find programs that are hiring for potential, right? So and most of the tech companies, when they're looking at college hiring, they don't expect you to have previous experience. They're interviewing you based on your fundamentals, right? So they're going to be interviewing you based on your data structures and algorithms, on problem solving, on design, on big O notation, and your understanding of all of that, databases, and so forth. So they know that you don't have much experience, and if you do have experience, it's going to be very limited, right? So don't worry about that. The question is like, how do you get in front of a recruiter, or how do you get noticed, and so forth, right? I think part of it is building up a resume, creating the right resume for it. I have seen when I was a college recruiter, so many how should I say this, resumes that have 50 words or less. Like it was created like in 1 hour with no thought around it, right? So spend some time on that. Spend some time on building up um, your portfolio. You should have a link to your GitHub with some code samples there. Um, you should be active on GitHub if you want to as well. That helps a lot. I know some recruiters go on GitHub and look for people there, recruiting on GitHub as well. You want to lay out all the classes that you had in your resume. And then, to be proactive, reach out to, search on LinkedIn and look for people who list out their title as a college recruiter, and reach out to them and say, hey, here's my resume. Love to talk to you about an opportunity I'm very interested in and I'm very motivated. Let's talk, right? So you don't need to have previous experience, but I think there's ways you can get to it. I'm not going to tell you it's easy, right? Like I think you're going to be applying to 50, 100 different internships and maybe getting one or two, right? So don't feel discouraged. It is a numbers game. There's a lot of people looking for internships as well, and internships are relatively small in terms of a pool, right? Okay, it is a lot of work, a lot of time on the companies with very little immediate upside. Like they're really doing it for future growth and future potential, and so they're not going to be able to spend a lot of time there around that. Let's see, we're on the next page overall. There's a lot of good questions actually. I'm going to answer. So, should you try to learn as many programming languages as possible? I'm going to say no. I think when you talk to a Microsoft, Google, Facebook caliber developer, what they're looking for is not the language that how many languages you know, right? It's that you have the fundamentals. Do you have the right foundation, understanding of how data structures work and how to problem solve something, or do you know the algorithms that are pretty typical in the area? If you have the right fundamentals, you can learn whatever languages you want. It's not like learning languages where learning Japanese or Chinese or Mandarin or English or Spanish. They're so different that it takes a lot of work. If you know Java, you can learn C++ pretty quick, or C# pretty quick, or Kotlin or anything else, right? The programming languages don't really matter. And in fact, I think some companies will expect you to sort of learn and adapt as you go. But if you don't have the right fundamentals, it doesn't really matter, right? So I don't. If you want to learn all these different languages, that's great. I don't know if that's a requirement, and I don't know if that's going to get you a leg up, right? Because the other thing I was going to say is, like, if you know like 15 languages, but you know them at a very surface level, it might have done you better to just know Java pretty well, right? But more important than knowing Java, your fundamentals pretty well, right? Data structures primarily. So, what company should I go into if I focus working on games or videos? That's a good question. I think early on you should keep your try gaining experience primarily, right? I think you can signal that you're interested in games by working on games on your side. If you and obviously you're going to focus your search on game companies, small and large, right? The big studios, the small studios, and so forth. Um, just be aware, like the games industry, as you probably know, is very competitive. It's not sure it's cutthroat, but they're very resource limited, right? And games development is very expensive, very time consuming. So they may not have a really established internship program. So I would say establish get some experience, go to any company first, and then sort of narrow your search later on as you go through into games or video. Video is also very limited, but I think there's more companies out there. Discovery, my current company right now, is hiring video engineers or video streaming. Netflix, Hulu, and so forth. Disney, HBO. There's tons. NBC, ABC, everybody's doing video stuff right now beyond just the normal YouTube and Vimeo stuff as well. So a lot of options there, but games are a little bit different. So I would actually talk to a games engineer or someone who's in the games industry. I think actually one's coming up soon. Well, I think CodeDay will have something like that. I think somewhere. Tori Baker this morning had it from Stadia, which is sort of games focused. But reach out to some games engineers online and see you can have a conversation with them and see what the right path is for that. That's better. That's better than what I can provide right now. What programming languages are required by tech companies? To be quite frank, like a lot of them are going to say you pick a language, right? But what they're expecting you to do is either Java, C++, or something that has object orientedness, right? Like don't use Perl, don't use something like Fortran. I mean, if anybody knows Fortran, you should, it's actually a big market for you guys actually, because there's no one there who knows Fortran. But like that was a joke, right? So but something that's relatively complex, something that has data structures, that has a more object oriented is pretty good. But and something that's relatively popular, like C#, not so popular for companies, at least for the interview stage. But generally, if you ask them, they'll say whatever language you want to use. Just don't do it in even Python. Like if you're interviewing in Python for a Microsoft or Amazon or something that's going to be tricky. Just be careful what language you use overall. How can I get the attention of recruiters and possibly get a company referral? That's tricky, right? There's a lot of college. When I used to do college recruiting, I would get bombed with invites from LinkedIn on people looking from college students looking for it, and it was really hard to track, right? Using your network, use your school network. See if your school has an alumni database that you could tap into. Alumni speakers that come into, some recent grads that come over and help out. See if you can get their help with that. See if your friends who are in the CS program or your classmates have worked at some other companies as well. Use them as well to get it. Getting a personal referral is much better than a general application. Applying is, to be quite frank, you should always do it, but it's also the least likely chance of success, right? Because a lot of times your application does go into a general pool for that role, and for a internship there could be tens of thousands of applicants in there, so it's really, really hard. I know some of the bigger companies will have resources to go through every single one, but that's very unlikely. I misspelled internships on this page. This is terrible. But that's one. The other thing is go on LinkedIn, right? I said, even though I didn't, respond to a lot of people who pinged me, it's always a good shot to do it, right? It's free. You can reach out to some recruiters on LinkedIn. Make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date. It should be your online resume. Make it as detailed as your resume is, of all your classes you're taking and your certifications or your projects or whatever. Make sure you put some work into it, and then you reach out to recruiters, because recruiters will look at your LinkedIn page first before your resume. Anyways, go look at your school's career center I mentioned before, to see if any companies are coming on campus, or at least if they have any relationships with any companies as well. And just try to. I wouldn't recommend reaching out to like Jeff Bezos or emailing Jeff at Amazon, but you want to be uh, you want to show initiative, but you also don't want to be too crazy in the sense. But I would say whatever you can do to get some contacts and just reach out to them. I think that's the way to go. It is relatively difficult, so spread a wide net. It's going to take a lot of time on your side, and so I think you should invest that time in your search. Um, let's see. I think I talked a little bit about this before. Do grades matter in applying internship in jobs? I don't think there's any company out there that's going to ask for your GPA, and I don't think any company is going to ask you for your transcript, right? So I don't think grades matter, honestly. It's terribly for to say, but I think your experience matters more. What you do is matters more, and if you have a bad GPA, don't worry about it, right? Like it's not going to limit you into applying to a large company or to a prestigious company or whatever you call it. So so you don't have to put your GPA on there. If you want to, you're more than welcome to, but I don't think it's required, and so forth. Um, Someone mentioned Google does ask for a GPA during your application process. That's very interesting. Um, yeah, well, yeah, that matters. But I know I think yeah, it's just one element I think to your application. If you can show you have some experience or show that you have some classes that you're taking, that you have some that you're really into it, then I think you can still get a Google internship if you have a relatively okay GPA. That's the one I want to answer. If you're in high school, does internship have to match your future major? Absolutely not, right? Like I think internships are a really really cool way of getting real world experience, right? Um, um, and people change their minds all the time, right? So if you start do internship, a medical internship in your high school, and you're like, hey, no, I want to be a CS, it's not going to hurt you in any way, right? It's going to give you a benefit. Actually, I would say that has some diversity in what you've done in the past. So no, you don't have to be like narrow focus on CS or engineering from the very beginning of to the end, right? I would say like to do just find interest, do something, just get some experience. I think it's always good. That's easier said than done. I apologize if it sounds a little harsh, but uh, I don't think it matters too much that you have a narrow, you can demonstrate a narrow focus in one way or the other. Let's see. How do you find opportunities for internships in high school since they do not have career centers? Google search. It sounds weird, but like there are a lot of people out there that are listing out internships. There are a lot of places that are aggregating all that information for you, right? It's a little bit trickier, I think, for high schoolers because sometimes they're much more localized than others. But you know, um, I I think spend some time to find them if you can. They're Yeah, you don't have a career centers. Maybe your guidance counselor in high school has some resources. I don't know how good they are these days, but sometimes they might be pretty decent to be able to track some of those. But I think the hardest part in all that is discovery, right? And so I'm being finding those, right? So find those, do as many searches as you can, find lists out there that people have already created, um, and and so forth. So that's probably not a great answer for you, but I don't think you should be too limited by what your career center says. Again, just demonstrate that you have that initiative and just go out and look for it. I think the answer is out there. Um, let's see. The grades matter. Practice material. How can I know what questions they will ask and what happens if I not get the good answer, right? Like, so, okay, if you don't get a good answer, you're probably not moving forward. So that's pretty simple. But how can you know what questions they ask? That's where LeetCode and some of those places come in. People have documented the questions they've been asked, and the pool of questions is pretty large, but um, they they're relatively very similar. They're very much covering the basics, the fundamentals. They're going to ask follow-up questions to see if you truly understand and if you can sort of be coached in the process as well. So I would say practice. It doesn't do you any good though to just memorize the answers overall. You need to understand why, right? So just like you practice for the SATs and any other standardized test, go out there, practice a little bit, understand why certain answers work, understand like what areas you should be covering, you should know about, and practice those as well. It does require work on your side, but I think you can do it. I think it's something that you should do, especially if you're aware of what you should be doing earlier on. Then you have more time to practice as well. Yeah, I mean, like, so I'm going to continue asking questions, answering questions throughout, but definitely, if you do have any other questions, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn page is there. I also am doing some personal coaching, although that's on the hold. But if you ever want interested in that, I can sort of help you with that as well. Please tell me you're from CodeDay, so I will definitely accept your invite and answer your questions on LinkedIn. But I really appreciate your time. Hopefully your day goes on pretty well. I know you have a talk right after this, so you can go ahead and jump over there. But I'm going to continue answering questions that are here. But thank you for your time. Good luck with everything. It's going to be a fun time today, and hopefully you have a good weekend. So let's continue on. Should I design projects and learn things that will correlate with my career path, right? For example, I want to